Hello, gorgeous people, and welcome to another TV Central one-on-one podcast. I'm Aaron Ryan. This is episode 54, 2023. Australia in the 1950s was known as the Golden Age, a time when proud Australians worked to build homes for their families. Homes exactly like the 5 houses on this season of The Block, the 19th one of the series so far. Set in the family-friendly suburb of Hampton East, the Blockheads will travel back in time as they tackle the retro homes. Julian Cress is the co-creator and has been executive producer of The Block for the entire 19 seasons and has built nothing short of an empire for Channel 9. The Block returns Sunday, the 6th of August on 9 and 9 Now. Julian Cress is here now for a chat at TV Central. Julian, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, first up, watching the promos and the media for this new 1950 season sees a little bit of fun in terms of costumes and sets. Are you guys having just a little bit too much fun this season?
Too much fun? Is that a thing? I didn't know that was even a thing. We found these incredible, untouched 1950s homes, and they just really kind of spoke to us creatively about which direction we could go with the show this year, and obviously had the same impact on the promos department at Channel 9, who immediately saw the 1950s in full Technicolor, Grease style, with a bit of Rocky Horror Show time warp thrown in. I don't know, a bit of Grease and a bit of Rocky Horror Show. I think that's just what people need coming out of winter.
Absolutely. So let's set up this season in terms of the actual build. Tell me about the homes chosen and the choice of this 1950s theme. I think you've actually already alluded to that. I mean, I was going to ask, did you choose the theme or did the theme choose you? But it sounds like the theme chose you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. The location chooses us, in a sense that we always need to pivot our show to something new every year to retain the sort of freshness. I think that may be part of the secret of why we're still around after 19 series, because the audience, doesn't get bored with a show that is in a brand new and completely different location every year. The contestants, are always facing a brand new kind of challenge, and this year's no exception. What really jumped out at me when we found these homes is that they presented as original. So, so often you find houses, but if they're 70 years old, they've usually really been completely redone many times sometimes. So most of these houses had not been renovated, and a couple of them were in completely original condition. They really looked like Nana had just passed on. They were even furnished in that style, and that kind of then designated this creative idea of doing something that we hadn't done before, which is normally when the contestants arrive at the block, and you've watched the show, you'd know this, that they turn up to what is essentially a bit of a building site, because our builders have had to go in and do a fair bit of work to get ready. So they usually turn up and they're surrounded by building rubble and dust and dirt and that kind of thing. But this year, because these houses were untouched, we thought, well, let's leave them untouched, which created a wonderful opening for the show, I think, in episode 1, where the audience gets to see, that they're starting from basically a standing start. But it also meant that the challenge ahead of them was enormous, because our builders hadn't gone in and done a lot of the work that they normally do to get ready for the contestants to be able to renovate a house in 12 weeks. They had to start from scratch, as did our builders who are working alongside them, which meant that all of those things that you discover when you're renovating that add to the challenge of renovating were discovered while the cameras were rolling rather than beforehand. So I think that just created a lot more content for us. It created a massive amount of work for our builders and everybody involved, but it also added a lot of really valuable and really interesting content for the show. And I think the other thing that about it was, last year we did the big, tree change series in the country,
Mm,
and that's because everybody was talking about tree changes 18
yeah.
months ago. It was really on their mind because we were coming through this dreadful pandemic. Whereas this year, after 12 interest rate rises, we were feeling more that people were, if they're still interested in buying, renovating, and making a upgrading the family home, they're probably not looking for 10 acres in the country. They're probably looking for a little unrenovated original 1950s cottage in the suburbs that they can add another level to accommodate them and their kids. And that's why we think that, moving to this show in this location, in a really aspirational place like Hampton, was a good pivot.
So I'm just trying to understand this. So you're going to keep this sort of the structures in place, this 1950s structure. So when we talk about building, is this more about the painting, maybe pulling out the bathroom and kitchen and starting again? Because obviously this doesn't sound like a total, clean the entire guts out of it, but perhaps electrical has to be upgraded. It's going to look a little bit different to previous seasons.
No, we have a really ambitious program for the contestants to completely modernize these homes.
Ah, right.
The 1950s house is, obviously has a romantic kind of notion about it, but it's nowhere that anybody wants to live anymore.
Yeah.
Um, they're pretty dark. They're project homes that were slapped together very quickly. Often, um, you know, the 1950s house in an Australian suburb after World War II, is not a Frank Lloyd Wright masterpiece of, mid-century modern. It's a slapped together brick, single story house that would barely accommodate a modern family with modern needs. So we allowed our architect, Julian Frenchley, to go wild with, really creating very interesting double story, modern 2023 looking homes while retaining as much of the original home as possible so that it was achievable in a 3-month deadline. So the answer, that was a long answer, but the answer is they're going to do as much as anybody's ever had to do on the block before. They're just going to do it from a standing start in the 12 weeks, and that's going to lead to a level of chaos rarely seen on the show before.
Let's chat about the contestants this season. I've watched the first episode, and there's certainly a mixed bag. I think you probably know one of the teams I'm going to ask about. The sisters from Victoria, Eliza and Liberty, have absolutely zero renovating experience. I know that to be on the block, you don't have to be a complete pro, but some kind of know-how, and perhaps odd jobs around the house, or your own house does help. What stood out for you with the sisters in terms of their application? And is this lack of experience something that will put them on the back foot this season?
Oh, it definitely puts them on the back foot. But in the history of our show, we have always wanted to cater to everybody watching. Now, we haven't always cast tradespeople, for contestants. And in fact, in the very first series of the show, we put Phil and Amity in there who had zero renovating experience. I don't think either of them had ever held a paintbrush, let alone a drill.
Wow.
Now, they didn't win the first series that they were in, but they did win the All-Star series when they came back.
Yeah.
So it goes to show that, you don't need necessarily to have a lot of renovating experience. The thing that struck me about the two sisters is, yes, they're novices when it comes to renovating, but they're not novices when it comes to being organized.
Yeah.
Eliza has been a very high level executive assistant for a long time. Her sister is a producer in sport, in video production, and you need a high level of organization to do that. So what I was thinking is that they'll struggle with a lot of what the block throws at you, but they should have a skill set that would trump a builder who is unorganized.
Yeah.
Because you do get a budget, and you are allowed to go out and find your own builders and trades, and then you manage them.
Yeah.
And if you work together well as a team, you should be able to get through it. They definitely, had their ups and downs across 12 weeks of doing the block, but that's TV, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. We want to put people into, situations that's really outside of their comfort zone and test them to their limits. And if they have the strength and the willpower and the ability to do it day in, day out for 12 weeks running, then their chance of success should be as good as anybody's.
Yeah. Look, we won't go through each couple, but is there anything that you could add about Kyle and Leslie, Leah and Ash, Christy and Brett and Steph and Jan? Is there a couple to look out for, or something of interest about one of the teams?
Well, I would say just to pick one other, I mean, they're all fantastic, but Steph and Gianna are interesting because she's an architect, and we've never had an architect as a contestant on the show before. She's a young architect. She's only really just at the beginning of her career. I mean, they're very young. Steph and Gianna are only, in their mid-20s, 26. But they have an incredibly strong relationship because they've been together since they were 13. So they've been together for as long as most couples that we've ever had on the show, who are often much older. So they come with a real strength in their relationship, but the block is obviously going to test an architect, because the study of architecture, tends to be done by people who have, very strong opinions about what they want. And the first thing she runs up against is our architect, of course, who's already had to make a lot of those decisions for her before she starts. And so that leads to some pretty interesting stories along the way too.
Well, there seems to be a divide with the audience, or perhaps it's just the media, to be honest. But in terms of drama versus the actual building on the show, the pure enthusiasts of like the renovating, the getting the tips, the being inspired, watching the fabulous transformations. Then there's the other part of the audience that are less concerned about the builds and are heavily invested in the drama, the walkouts, the arguments, the tantrums. I mean, the cheating scandal last season certainly elevated already big ratings for the show. So how do you balance the purity of the building aspect of the show with the so-called drama?
The key is balance. As you just said, if we know that there are two different audiences coming to the show, and then there's a blend in between. There's no way that if we just made a show about watching paint dry, that we would have the ratings that we do. There's a younger audience that's very engaged with modern reality television, and they're not coming to it for design decisions and which taps and tiles the contestants choose. They're coming to it because they want to see what the competition is like between these people and the politics and so on. So we're lucky that our show is on for 4 nights a week, I guess. As hard as it is to to make that much content, it allows us the ability to cater to both sides of that audience across the week and to find a balance across each episode about design decisions and building challenges, and also include a lot of the competitive politics that's going on behind the scenes. And I think blending those things successfully is probably the secret to our success.
Adrian Swift, Nine's head of content production and development, said a couple of days ago, and I quote, "The maths dinner parties are nothing compared to this season of The Block." What is going to happen this season? I mean, you can't give any spoilers, but that's a big statement to make. Those maths dinner parties are pretty big.
Yeah, it's really interesting that building a house in 12 weeks is an incredibly hard thing to do. Building a house in 12 weeks in competition with 4 other couples who are living right next door adds a lot to that. It means that you are forced to engage. So, you've never met your neighbours before coming into the show. You've never met these people, but you know instantly that if you're one of tens of thousands of couples who've applied and got through, you know that the people that you're competing against must be pretty tough, competitive people too. And so what do you do? Well, often, you either decide that, screw these people, I'm just going to stick in my own lane and build my own house and have nothing to do with them, which is rare, or you're going to make alliances, you're going to build friendships, you're going to try and get close to the enemy and, get on side with them, be able to go and ask them for some gap filler when you need it. And so these intense kind of friendships are built, alliances or friendships, call it what you will. But at the same time, the being in there and winning or losing against them tests these friendships in a really intense way. So what we've got ahead in this series of the show is people becoming seemingly best friends within weeks of being together, but those friendships being tested to the point where they actually fall apart, where friendships pivot to different people. Suddenly you've got people who were best mates 3 weeks ago and they're saying now she's dead to me, which is, an incredible thing to happen within a 3-month period. But it's because of the pressure cooker environment of the show that these things even happen. And from my point of view, that's entertainment.
All right. So Shayna, Darren, and Neil are back this season, but they're joined by White Fox CEO and real estate guru Marty Fox. Tell me about Marty, and also, this is not the first time we've seen him on the show, is it?
No, Marty's auctioned a couple of properties previously, so we've gotten to spend a bit of time with him and see how he operates, and he's an absolute pro. He's a very talented, gifted real estate agent who's built a very strong business and represented a lot of buyers and sellers in that area of Melbourne. So he knows that market as well as anybody. It was an unfortunate situation that led to us reaching out to Marty, which is that Neil Whitaker had, needed to take personal leave this year. But Marty was a perfect choice to come and fill in for Neil when needed. And he brings an energy to judging that I think is really exciting. It reminds me of where we started The Block, 20 years ago, where our judge for the first 3 seasons, and we only had one, was John McGrath, who was the CEO of his own eponymous real estate agency in Sydney. And judging through that real estate lens is kind of what we always wanted for judging for The Block. It's where the show started. So, putting a real estate agent back in the mix, I think was really successful, and I hope the audience agrees.
All right, so let's go back a bit because you have gone back to talking about where the show started. So season one, as you mentioned, no Scotty, no Shelley, no Neil, no Shayna, no Darren. In fact, none of the current on-air casts were in the first two seasons. It's hard to imagine. Tell me about the initial vision of the show, the pitch to the network, and the original choice of host and judge Jamie Durie and John McGrath.
Well, it's a long time to go back, but when you think about 2002, when we pitched the show, there really were only a couple of reality shows on air in the world at that time. There was Big Brother and Survivor, and they were very fresh and very new. What we said to the network is that we want to make a show that taps into both of those. It's going to have elements of Big Brother, and it's going to have elements of Survivor, but it's also going to have elements of Melrose Place. So the idea was that we wanted to put, because that was another great show of that time, about friends and neighbours, thrust together into an apartment building, who built relationships, and those relationships thrived and failed on a weekly basis. So Melrose Place is probably a really good example for anybody who remembers it of what this 19th series of the show feels like, because often we felt like, as producers, we were living in Melrose Place with these people.
One of my absolutely favorite shows. I've got every episode on DVD. I love Melrose Place. We could have a whole podcast talking about that one. But I just can't remember that far back with the Block's ratings. Do you remember, was it a hit straight out of the gate, or was it like Ten's Have You Been Paying Attention, in which it had to find its feet and then the audience grew after that?
Yeah, I think the network would be pretty happy if we were getting the ratings that we got in series one. It averaged over 2.5 million viewers an episode across 12 weeks. And the series finale did 6 million viewers. It was watched by half the country. So the first series of The Block, surprisingly to us and Nine, was the highest rating show in the history of Australian television. Interestingly, though, the second series did very well too. It did about 1.7 as an average across the series. Yeah. But the show then was actually rested. It was cancelled. These were heady days, when networks were chasing 1.8 as an average rather than 1.7. So the show stopped for a few years, and didn't come back again until 2010. But the success of the show now is obviously that the TV landscape's a very different place, and getting 2.7 million viewers, on a Sunday night, is a very unusual thing. We've only ever got there again with the auction episodes at the end, but you don't need to get 2.7 to stay on Australian screens these days. In a landscape where you're competing against Netflix and Disney Plus.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the reason behind the big sort of season 3 changes, but I guess you've alluded to that because the show sort of went away for a few years. Season 3, that's when Scotty came in with initially only Neil Whitaker. Season 4, Shelley came in with Foreman Keith. Season 5 was Shayna came in, and then season 6 saw John leave and Darren come in. So from then on, the Block has continued to have the same presenters, judges. Is it just the timing of people coming in and out, or did you feel around that season 4, 5, and 6 you were really cementing the tone of the show that set you up for your big, massive success? Although, as you said, you did have it earlier.
Yeah, the show has evolved as needed, and I think we've been, incredibly lucky. as we've brought people into the show and they fitted in so well. But if you like, for example, season 3 to season 4 was a big shift for us. Season 3 was in Vaucluse and it was on once a week, on a Sunday night. Season 4, when we came to Melbourne, and Michael Healy said, you know what, I reckon we could strip this show and run it, for 2 or 3 nights a week. That necessitated adding format elements to the program to fill the extra time. And that's when we thought, well, let's do weekly challenges where the contestants have to go offsite and do something interesting that maybe relates back to the renovating that they're doing. And that's why we brought in Shelley Craft, so that we had somebody who could be, hosting with the challenges and just to add another element to the program. And bringing Shelley in was just fantastic for the format. She's been brilliant. Working with Scott, they're great mates. It's very obvious, watching them on television, they have fantastic chemistry. They bounce off each other. They've both got great sense of humor. So those moments in the show, it really come alive. And so that's an example of where we've just evolved the format by necessity, because and now we're on 4 nights a week. So that's where having Foreman Keith and Foreman Dan is important, because the building projects that we're doing are tremendously more complicated than they were back when we started. Season 1 was 12 weeks of 4 couples, each renovating a 73 square metre apartment in Bondi. We're now at a point where in 1 week, our contestants are doing a 73 square metre living dining area.
Wow.
So it's the same time frame, but it's 12 times the effort.
Yeah. All right. Look, in terms of the locations, I think maybe 4 were outside Victoria. That's including the first 3 seasons, which were in New South Wales. In terms of crews, presenters, judges, is it just easier to stay in Victoria, or do you think maybe you'll do a season over here in WA or something?
It's not about the crews and the hosts that were in Victoria. I mean, Scott Cam comes to Melbourne from Sydney, and Shelley comes from Byron Bay to Melbourne in order to do the show. So they're travelling to make it. It probably has more to do with the audience to a degree. Melbourne is a place that really, we brought the show to Melbourne to thank Melbourne for watching, because the highest ratings that the show had in the first couple of series were from Melbourne.
Yeah.
And then when we got here to Melbourne, we discovered that the ratings went up even further, because Melbourne people love a show that's made in their own town. And so we stayed. The other reason is property prices. I mean, going back to Sydney and making the block is probably out of the question now, because if we were to look to buy 5 1950s cottages in an aspirational suburb of Sydney, it would literally break the bank of the Nine network just to do it. And to be honest, Perth's not a cheap place to travel to make the show either. As much as I'd love to make the show in Perth. I mean, I think our whole crew would love to, to spend a few months over there in the West making a series of the block. And I think Australia would love it if we did. So if you know of 5 houses in need of renovation that are side by side in a nice suburb in Perth, please do let me know.
I absolutely will. I've got the headline already. Big 20th anniversary of the block in WA. Beautiful.
Yeah, I reckon it'd be awesome.
All right, just jumping around a bit now, I wanted to ask you about false claims just in general that seem to happen from time to time with the block. I mean, I think last year there was a insider claim the contestants had access to minimal amounts of food, all this kind of stuff. Now, these kind of claims make great headlines for the tabloids. Working in the industry, do you kind of understand that, that these claims are made for publicity and clickbait, or do they actually really get on your nerves?
No, I mean, I find most of them really amusing. That one's a classic. That did originate within the contestants somewhere. I won't point a finger at who, but it was said probably out of frustration. But it was a claim that was easily refuted, considering that we have McDonald's as a sponsor. We have Aldi as a sponsor. In terms of access to food, McCafe, McDonald's, Aldi, Aldi was a 4-minute drive from the block, and we give our contestants a Ford and the keys to that Ford. And we don't tell them what to do every day. They can go wherever they like. So, it's funny to see those stories get picked up and get such wide coverage. But back to your question, I'm pretty happy about that. I mean, obviously, the editors of these tabloids believe that running stories about the block will be of interest to their readers. Hence the word clickbait. And if that's the case, and it must be, then that makes me happy. I like to know that there are a lot of people out there who are interested in the show, because it means that when we put the show on television, hopefully they'll tune in to watch it.
Yeah. I guess technically they're correct if they choose not to get in the car and choose not to get the food, or choose not to get McDonald's, or choose not to get the sponsored, product. Then I guess they would be hungry. But by the way, in reference to clickbait stories, I'm very sorry to hear that Scott Cam is leaving the block. You must be in shock.
Yeah, that's a terrible blow. I don't know how we're going to do it without Scott. I mean, that I don't know where that story would have come from, and that just feels like it was just totally made up to generate a headline. It certainly didn't come from us. Didn't come from Scott, who I'm happy to tell you has just signed a new deal with Nine, because he loves making the block as much as he does. I mean, he's got 60 now. He doesn't. The fact that he is still going so strong and still enjoys doing the show with us as much as he does is very gratifying. And I can't really imagine the show without him now.
All right. In a slightly different direction, if you are co-creator and exec producer of the show, I'm guessing your role is probably everything. But to give listeners an idea, what is it that you actually do in terms of the show, from I guess gathering the location to filming the series, or are you literally involved in everything?
I'm a bit of a control freak. I like to be involved in everything, but I do have an absolutely fantastic team working for me. My right hand is Justin Sturzacker, executive producer, who's been on the show since we started. We've got an amazing team of technicians, from our, director of photography and our director of audio, and people who just know their job inside out and have been with us for a very long time, at least a decade. But I guess my job is to guide each series creatively to make sure that it's going to provide something a bit different from the last one. And so that the property selection is really important part of my work. And then the creative for what we do to those properties and how we should approach it. And working with, the real estate agents throughout to make sure that we're bringing the right thing to market and that it's saleable. I mean, everybody wants to see the contestants do well, I believe. You know, you really get invested in these people. They put in such an enormous amount of effort over 3 months. And if you've been watching them 4 nights a week for 3 months, you really want them to have some success at the auction. So a lot of my job is to make sure that we don't screw that up by creating a product that doesn't meet the market at the right time, because it's incredibly hard to sell 5 houses in one day side by side. And so we need to be in a market that we won't be saturating, where we feel like there'll be enough buyers around to deliver a windfall for the contestants. And that's a tough part of any brief. But then when we're in production, my job is to basically stand back and watch. You know, I spend 7 days a week at the block, watching what's happening and listening to the contestants and talking to them behind the scenes to make sure that, you know, we're managing their welfare, but also to make sure that the contestants feel that, you know, that they're valued as part of the project, not just for building a house, but for making a TV show as well.
All right, I won't do as we get to the wind up of this podcast, I won't do a whole "this is your life" thing. But when I do these podcasts, especially with executives like Hamish Turner that I did at Angus Ross, people are always interested in the transition that people have from, you know, just being at high school to then being, you know, in that example, head programmer at a network, and in your case, co-creator and executive producer of one of the most successful franchises in Australia. So what were you doing before this? And then what led you to be the executive producer and co-creator of something like The Block?
Well, I was a journalist. So I'd come through radio and a bit of TV. I'd moved from radio to television to become a producer on a brilliant show called Beyond 2000.
Yeah,
Back
Amanda
in the
Keller.
day, it was a juggernaut on the Seven Network, made by Beyond Productions. And then I moved to 60 Minutes. So I was really lucky when I was 25 to land a job as a researcher at the 60 Minutes program, and ended up spending a decade there, which was a wonderful place to learn storytelling. We were shooting on 16mm film at the time. So as a filmmaking apprenticeship, it was pretty incredible as well. And just working, you know, traveling the world and, you know, and telling stories about people. You know, when Survivor and Big Brother arrived in 2001, that was the year that, you know, I had done many years of traveling. I'd been, you know, confronted with a lot of, you know, tough stuff that I'd seen around the world. The last story that I did for 60 Minutes was 9/11. And I was pretty exhausted by that point, and looking for another challenge, trying to, you know, see what else I could do. And then I saw these reality shows, you know, Big Brother and Survivor, and thought, well, this is interesting. This is kind of in my wheelhouse too, because these are real people who are competing in these shows, you know, and that was a big shift. You hadn't seen real people on television previously. They were all presenters or actors. So I was very excited about that, and then fortunate enough to meet David Barber, who worked in lifestyle television, so came from the other direction. But we were both just fully interested in this new phenomenon of reality television and wanting to do our own version. And we had a good look around, and we used to, you know, spend a few hours a week talking about what we'd seen or what else could work for reality TV. And then, you know, thought, well, what about real estate? You know, Big Brother is a show that is a juggernaut in ratings around the world, but you basically watch people sit around in a fully renovated house and not really do anything all day. What if they had to renovate the house that they were in? And that was the question. What if they had to renovate the house that they were in on Big Brother? And that led to the creation of The Block, where we were lucky enough to be, get the support from Peter Meakin and Michael Healy and David Gingell at the time, because it was a big risk for all of them to take, to go out and buy an entire apartment block to test the idea that people might want to watch real people renovating, because we were the first show in the world to do that. So that's a quick history of how we got here for me.
Well, it's actually really really interesting that I'm glad we have creative minds out there. Someone actually thought Big Brother's on, but imagine if they were actually renovating this thing and then just go in a whole different direction. So it's awesome. I'm guessing each season there is a learning curve, and each season gets better. What are some of the things that you can remember that you didn't like or you thought viewers didn't connect with, and then you changed or improved in subsequent seasons?
Oh, that's a good question. What mistakes have we made along the way?
Oh, not so
I'm
much
sure.
mistakes, but maybe you thought, gee, this will be a good idea, and then maybe that idea didn't quite connect with viewers, and then so you changed it up for the next season. I mean, it's been pretty high ratings every season, so I think you pretty much got it right.
Yeah. I'm sure there'd been plenty, but I think that we've been very fortunate to be able to, evolve the show incrementally as we go. So we're not making wholesale changes to the format because we need to test, a new model of the car, because the show has evolved and maintained its fan base as that fan base has, also evolved. I mean, we've got frequently, people now watching the show who are parents who started watching the show when they were kids.
Wow.
And now they're watching it with their kids. And that's pretty phenomenal. But that also means that, they've evolved with the show. Obviously, we get a lot of feedback and we listen to it. We don't dismiss the feedback from the audience who say, I think there's too much of the drama and not enough of the renovating. I think that I want to know more information about, where those cushions come from and how to buy the artwork and that kind of thing. And we look at the show and think, well, we're not going to be able to satisfy that person. So what are we going to do? We can't fit enough content in without losing the drama, to give them satisfaction. So then we start to think laterally and say, how about we start an online store called The Block Shop, and we create a new channel for all of those people to remain engaged with the show. And then we're realizing that technologically things have evolved as well, and people are watching that channel 9 or 9 now, but they've also got their iPad in their lap, and we can deliver them a new channel where they can now source the artwork that they're seeing on a Sunday night immediately and look at it and learn a bit more about the artist. And if they're really keen, then they can buy it and have it delivered to their home. And so their satisfaction level is maintained a bit better just by thinking a bit more outside of the box in terms of how you please everybody all the time.
All right, and just the final question, as we wrap up, what can viewers look forward to this season? I mean, you have alluded to that in a few questions, but I guess I know there's going to be a second building. I think that they're going to be, I guess, building within their property, and also this season they get to know what the renovations, what's actually happening first up this time.
Yeah, the challenge for the contestants was so big, that we felt that we if to give you an example, if you are in week 5 doing a master bedroom upstairs, and then on Sunday you find out that next week you've got to do the kitchen underneath it, have you made all of the provision for the range hood that's going in the kitchen and the plumbing and things while you were doing the bedroom, or you're now going to have to pull the bedroom apart to make it work? These are the logistical challenges of, building a house in 12 weeks. And so we'd also had the cheating scandal where one of the contestants had photographed our production whiteboard, and we kind of thought, well, we don't want that again. So we decided to give them the entire schedule up front. So that allowed them to plan better across the 12 weeks to probably mirror more of what an Australian family who buy a project home from the 1950s in the suburbs and want to renovate it for themselves also have to do, which is to plan it out from beginning to end. So it may resonate better with renovators to see the contestants knowing their schedule up front. So maybe that will please the segment of the audience that wants to see more building in the show, but at risk of pissing them off, I'm going to say that the thing that people will see more from this series than they've seen in a long time is human drama. This is one of the most explosive and dramatic series of the show that we've ever made. Going back to Adrian Swift's comment about the maths dinner parties, they got nothing on this series of The Block.
Sounds like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Grease, Home and Away, and maths all rolled into one. So they're going to get everything.
And a lot of Melrose Place.
Oh, Melrose Place, of course. Love it. Well, really looking forward to this season. 1950s, here we come. 19 seasons of The Block. Nothing short of a juggernaut. You've been part of all of it and looking forward to plenty more, including an incredible, we're looking ahead, though, 20th season soon. Thank you for your insights. I'm wishing you the best of luck this season. Not that you ever need it, but thank you for joining me, Julian.
Thank you, Aaron. It was awesome. Great to talk to you.
All right, that was Julian Cress, co-creator and executive producer of The Block. You can catch the new season from Sunday, the 6th of August at 7:00 on Channel 9 and 9 Now. Well, that's it for this podcast. For all the latest news, streaming options, ratings, television guides, and podcasts, head to tvcentral.com.au. But for now, I'm Aaron Ryan. Thanks to Julian Cress. Bye for now.